people who've dated a psycho. What incident made you aware that you were dating a psycho? My cousin's story is one of those tales that reminds you how crucial it is to follow your gut, even when it's scary as hell. She called off her wedding just 2 weeks before the big day, something that shook our whole family. But looking back, it was the best decision she could have made. It all started at another cousin's wedding. She was sitting there, watching the bride and groom exchange vows, lost in the moment. But instead of imagining herself in that place with her fiancé, she felt a strange emptiness. She didn't see herself feeling that same joy, that same connection. It was a moment of clarity that hit her like a ton of bricks. The man she was supposed to marry wasn't a bad guy, just not the right one for her. He was uneducated, which wasn't the issue by itself. But he lacked ambition. He'd been out of work for months and didn't seem to care about finding a new job. He was a bit aloof, not very warm, and while we all liked him enough, there was always something off about their relationship. It didn't have that spark, that sense of two people who just fit together. My cousin, on the other hand, is this incredibly positive and warm person. She lights up a room when she walks in, always smiling, always ready to help others. But with him, she seemed dimmed, like a light bulb that wasn't shining as brightly as it should. They just didn't seem to bring out the best in each other. After that wedding, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She thought about it constantly, and the more she did, the more she realized that she was settled. She was in her late 20s and had always wanted a family, but she hadn't dated seriously. In fact, this guy and maybe one other were the only boyfriends she'd ever had. It was as if she had latched onto the first person who showed her any real interest, and now she was on the brink of marrying him for all the wrong reasons. So she made the incredibly difficult decision to call off the wedding. She gave him the ring back, and they parted ways. As far as I know, they haven't had any contact since. It was heartbreaking at the time, and she went through a tough period of self-reflection. But deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. A few months later, she met someone new. He was recently divorced, his marriage having fallen apart after his wife became emotionally abusive. He was still healing from that, just as my cousin was healing from her broken engagement. They connected instantly, but my cousin, being the thoughtful person she is, didn't want to rush into anything. She wanted to take her time, to make sure she was truly ready before diving into another relationship. So, she politely turned him down at first. But he was persistent, not in an overbearing way, but in a way that showed he really cared. He kept showing up, offering to hang out as friends, and slowly they started spending more time together. They laughed, they talked, they grew closer, and eventually they started dating. Fast forward to February 2015, and they were getting married on a beach in Florida, surrounded by about 50 of their closest friends and family. It was a beautiful day. The kind of day where everything feels just right. The sun was shining. The waves were gently crashing in the background, and my cousin looked happier than I'd ever seen her. It was a far cry from the wedding she had called off just a year earlier. This time, there was no doubt in her mind that she was making the right choice. The moment it happened, I couldn't hold back the tears. I had just watched innocent people die, and the weight of that realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My thoughts were racing, spiraling out of control as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. All I could think was, oh my God, how many people were still in that building? My heart was pounding as I imagined the chaos, the fear, the helplessness that must have been consuming those who were trapped inside. And then there was my brother. He was on a flight when everything went down. The anxiety gnawed at me, twisting my stomach into knots as I imagined the worst. I didn't know if he was okay, if he was safe. All I knew was that the world was crumbling around me, and the people I loved might be caught in the crossfire. Hours later, I found out his flight had been forced to land before reaching its destination, and he had to rent a car and drive home. He was fine, but the relief that came with that news was drowned out by the overwhelming grief and fear I was still feeling. And then there was my friend who worked in the financial district in New York City. The thought of them being so close to the epicenter of this nightmare was unbearable. I was distraught, truly distraught, in a way I had never felt before. It was a kind of pain and helplessness that anyone with even an ounce of humanity would have felt. The kind of moment where your emotions take over and there's no holding back. Amid all this, as the tears streamed down my face, I felt someone lean in close. For a brief second, I thought they were trying to comfort me, to offer some kind of solace in the middle of this horrific experience. An arm wrapped around my shoulder, and I allowed myself to hope for just a tiny bit of compassion. But then, instead of soothing words, I heard a hiss in my ear. "You're fucking embarrassing me and making a scene. Stop crying or go sit in the car." The words cut through me like a knife, sharp and unexpected. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. At a time when I was drowning in despair, this person, someone who should have cared about my well-being, was more concerned with appearances, with being embarrassed by my raw, uncontrollable emotions. In that moment, any comfort I might have felt evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. How could someone be so callous? So cold in the face of such tragedy? I remember sitting there, the tears still coming, but now mixed with a new kind of pain. It wasn't just about the horror of what I'd witnessed anymore. It was about the stark realization that some people, even those close to you, can be so completely detached from the feelings of others. I didn't move. I didn't respond. I just kept crying, because that's all I could do. The world was burning down, and the person beside me was more concerned with keeping up appearances than acknowledging the shared humanity of that moment. I couldn't even bring myself to get up and go to the car like he wanted. To leave would have been to admit that my grief was something to be ashamed of, something that needed to be hidden away, but it wasn't. I wasn't going to apologize for feeling, for caring, for being human in the face of unimaginable horror. I stayed where I was, tears flowing freely, not for his sake, but for mine, because in that moment, all I had was the truth of my emotions, and no amount of hissing or pressure was going to take that away from me. That moment, when he hissed those words in my ear, was when I knew I was done. It wasn't just the cruelty of his words, or the complete disregard for what I was feeling. It was the realization that this was who he truly was, the person I had been with, lived with, shared so much of my life with, had no empathy. That part of him, the part that should care, just wasn't there. But I couldn't leave right away. We lived together, and I had to be smart about my exit. So I started biding my time, quietly planning how I would get out. Every day felt like a tightrope walk. I kept up appearances, pretending that everything was fine, while inside, I was already halfway out the door. The smallest things set him off, and I knew I had to tread carefully until I could make my move. Every interaction with him became a performance, a careful balancing act where I tried to avoid anything that might tip him off that I was planning to leave. Then, a few weeks later, everything came to a head. We got into an argument, something that had become all too common. I wanted to go out with my friends, to escape for just a little while, to breathe and feel like myself again. But he wasn't having it. He always got angry when I had any fun that didn't include him, like my happiness was a personal offense to him. The argument escalated quickly, his voice rising, his face contorting in anger. And then, in a flash, he had me pinned against the wall, his hand gripping my arm with a force that made me wince. He leaned in close, his breath hot and rancid on my face, and through gritted teeth he said, "I wish I could punch you in the fucking face right now." For a moment I froze, unable to process the level of venom in his voice. Then, as if to make it all a joke, he laughed. It was the most chilling sound I'd ever heard. Cold, empty, devoid of any warmth. That laugh was the final nail in the coffin. It was confirmation of what I'd already known deep down. He was broken in a way I couldn't fix, in a way that made him dangerous to be around. There was no empathy, no remorse, just a twisted satisfaction in his ability to control and intimidate. The next day, while he was at work, I packed my things. I didn't care about leaving anything behind. I just needed to get out. I threw what I could into a couple of bags, not bothering to be neat or careful. I was running on pure adrenaline, my hands shaking as I shoved clothes, books, and whatever else I could grab into those bags. With every item I packed, I felt a little lighter, like I was shedding the weight of all the fear and tension that had been building up inside me for months. I made sure to take anything important, my passport, bank statements, personal documents, anything that could tie me to him or that I might need later. By the time I finished, the apartment looked barely touched, as if I'd just stepped out for a moment and would be right back. But I knew I wouldn't be coming back. Not ever. When I finally walked out the door, I didn't look back. I just kept moving forward, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. I didn't know exactly what my future held, difficult, but I knew one thing for certain. It was going to be a future where I was free. Free from his anger, free from the fear, free from the constant weight of trying to manage his emotions. I wasn't going to live like that anymore. I refused to.